How do you keep there from being this military-industrial complex? By making it so that they could only take from the people during a 2-year period to provide for that army. Then we got the 16th and 17th Amendment, and that all went out the window, right? That was the 16th and 17th Amendment, 2 of the worst amendments ever in the history of America. I will not repeat here the observations which I flatter myself have placed this subject in a just and satisfactory light. He's patting himself on the back a little bit here. But it may not be improper to take notice of an argument against this part of the Constitution, which has been drawn from the policy and practice of Great Britain. It is said that the continuance of an army in that kingdom requires an annual vote of the legislature, whereas the American Constitution has lengthened this critical period to 2 years. So that's the argument of the Anti-Federalists. This is the form in which the comparison is usually stated to the public. But is it a just form? No, it's a CNN narrative. Is it a fair comparison? No, it's an MSNBC narrative. Does the British Constitution restrain the parliamentary discretion to 1 year? Does the American impose on the Congress appropriations for 2 years? On the contrary, it cannot be unknown to the authors of the fallacy themselves that the British Constitution fixes no limit whatsoever to the discretion of the legislature, and that the American ties down the legislature to 2 years as the longest admissible term. Had the argument from the British example been truly stated, it would have stood thus: the term for which supplies may be appropriated to the army establishment, though unlimited by the British Constitution, has nevertheless, in practice, been limited by parliamentary discretion to a single year. Big difference, right? So because it had never been pushed more than 1 year by the Parliament, a lot of the Anti-Federalists that were bringing this argument were, well, the British Constitution only allows 1 year and you guys are allowing 2. Madison had to correct him because he fact-checked it partially true. Right? But then again, he didn't try to take away their First Amendment right. When he found that something was partially true, he just told the truth. Wouldn't that be nice today if they said, well, that's misinformation? Okay, well then put out the true information and let people choose for themselves. But that's the problem, right? Because they don't like those of us that are critical thinkers. They like those that are the unthinking and the misthinking, because that's what the John Dewey model has pushed. Now, if in Great Britain, where the House of Commons is elected for 7 years, where so great a proportion of the members are elected by so small a proportion of the people, where the electors are so corrupted by the representatives, and the representatives so corrupted by the crown, oh, I thought he was talking about America there in today's. The representative body can possess a power to make appropriations to the army for an indefinite term, without desiring or without daring to extend the term beyond a single year. Ought not suspicion herself to blush in pretending that the representatives of the United States, elected freely by the whole body of the people every second year, cannot be safely entrusted with the discretion over such appropriations expressly limited to the short period of 2 years? Yes, prior to the 16th, 17th Amendment, that was absolutely correct. So do you see when they tricked the public into voting for the 16th and 17th Amendment, how critical it was for people to understand the principles? Because had they understood the principles, they would have went, wait a minute. If you do that, it won't be long till you're stealing from our children and our grandchildren to pay for a great big huge army that's here for more than 2 years. And it shouldn't be, because it should be a legislative function. Right? So do you see where our military-industrial complex sprang from? Simple little thing that we didn't think was that big of a deal. But it was chipping away one of those self-evident truths. It was chipping away one of the natural laws that kept our government balanced, that gave us the right amount of government. So you see how critical it is that the public, we the people, understand the principles of the Constitution? Because if not, you'll fall for something stupid like the 16th and 17th Amendment. A bad cause seldom fails to betray itself. Oh, isn't that the truth? Of this truth, the management of the opposition to the federal government is an unvaried exemplification. But among all the blunders which have been committed, none is more striking than the attempt to enlist on that side the prudent jealousy entertained by the people of standing armies. The attempt has awakened fully the public attention to that important subject and has led to investigations which must terminate in a thorough and universal conviction, not only that the Constitution has provided the most effectual guards against danger from that quarter, but that nothing short of a Constitution fully adequate to the national defense and the preservation of the Union can save America from as many standing armies as it may be split into states or confederacies, and from such a progressive augmentation of these establishments in each as will render them as burdensome to the properties and ominous to the liberties of the people, as an establishment that can become necessary under united and efficient government must be tolerable to the former and safe to the latter. So you've got the anti-federalists going, no, no, we don't want a federal government. We want each state to be sovereign, just like it is under the Articles of Confederation, right? What Madison is saying is, if you do that, each state has war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. That means each state will have to steal from its people to create an army. And at such time that each state has an army, pretty soon armies have to war. And they'll start warring with each state. And the most important thing is maintaining the Union. And what's going to happen when Virginia attacks Maryland? The Union's going to crumble. And so this argument that, well, you guys need to put a provision in there to keep an army so that you can only have an army for 1 year, just like Britain. First off, they misrepresented what Britain had, right? They did the CNN thing. And secondly, Madison's saying, well, that's pretty hypocritical of you. You're saying you don't want the national government to be able to have a little bit of an army, but yet you think it's okay for every state to have a standing army with no provision against it. Because there isn't any state constitution that has any provision against it. So what are you really arguing? Feelings. Nothing more than feelings, right? That must be where Barry Manilow got his song from. But yeah, it wasn't logic. It was, I reject your facts and institute my own feelings. That's what it was all about. The palpable necessity of the power to provide and maintain a navy has protected that part of the Constitution against a spirit of censure which has spared few other parts. It must indeed be numbered among the greatest blessings of America that as her Union will be the only source of her maritime strength, so this will be a principal source of her security against danger from abroad. In this respect, our situation bears another likeness to the insular advantage of Great Britain. The batteries most capable of repelling foreign enterprises on our safety are happily such as can never be turned by a perfidious government against our liberties. So what was the advantage of Great Britain? It was an island, basically, right? It wasn't connected like France was to Germany, to Spain, to Portugal. So it wasn't connected in the main body. So because it was a small little island, it did have a certain insular security. And that's what Madison's talking about. We do have a bit of an insular security with the Atlantic Ocean between us. But we can't be so naive as to believe that that technology's not going to get better, that the world's not going to get smaller, and depend on that as our only precaution, right? So that's what he's talking about when they're comparing it to Great Britain. The inhabitants of the Atlantic frontier are all of them deeply interested in this provision for naval protection. Yeah, the whole eastern seacoast. And if they are hitherto been suffered to sleep quietly in their beds, if their property has remained safe against the predatory spirit of licentious adventurers, if their maritime towns have not yet been compelled to ransom themselves from the terrors of conflagration by yielding to the exactions of daring and sudden invaders, these instances of good fortune are not to be ascribed to the capacity of the existing government for the protection of those from whom it claims allegiance, but to causes that are fugitive and fallacious. If we accept perhaps Virginia and Maryland, which are peculiarly vulnerable on their eastern frontiers, no part of the Union ought to feel more anxiety on this subject than New York. Her seacoast is extensive. So what he's saying is, if we keep with this Articles of Confederation, where each state is sovereign like a country and has the ability to war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, that means that all of the eastern states that are on the eastern seacoast, each one of them has to have their own navy. And how expensive is that going to be? Especially to New York, to the people of the state of New York. They had the greatest coastline, which means they had to abuse their people the most for a navy. So one of the things he's saying is, in this union, in which we share the cost a little bit and the ability, we don't have to have near as big of a navy to maintain, and yet that same navy can provide security for all of the states in the union that are on the sea coast. Makes sense, doesn't it? A very important district of the state is an island. The state itself is penetrated by a large navigable river for more than 50 leagues. The great emporium of its commerce, the great reservoir of its wealth, lies every moment at the mercy of events and may almost be regarded as a hostage for ignominious compliances with the dictates of foreign enemy, or even with the rapacious demands of pirates and barbarians. Should a war be the result of the precarious situation of European affairs and all the unruly passions attending it be let loose on the ocean, our escape from insults and depredations, not only on that element, but every part of the other bordering on it, will be truly miraculous in the present condition of America. The states more immediately exposed to these calamities have nothing to hope from the phantom of a general government which now exists. And if their single resources were equal to the task of fortifying themselves against the danger, the object to be protected would be almost consumed by the means of protecting them. Pretty much where we are right now, where our taxes are greater than the GDP. And where do most of our taxes go? Well, for a war in Ukraine, right? And when that creates a world war, then we're going to have to steal even more from the people to build our military even bigger, right? So what he's talking about here is, look, New York, most of your commerce comes because of all your shoreline. So if there's an attack and each state has to defend themselves, first off, you're going to have to tax your people into oblivion just to have protection of your shoreline. And if you don't protect your shoreline, you don't have any commerce to steal the money from the people. You're between a rock and a hard spot. The power of regulating and calling forth the militia has been already sufficiently vindicated and explained. So that's why in Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 18, it says that Congress has the ability to maintain a navy, but not maintain an army, but to raise an army. The power of levying and borrowing money, being the sinew of that which is to be exerted in the national defense, is properly thrown into the same class with it. This power also has been examined already with much attention, and has, I trust, been clearly shown to be necessary, both in the extent and form given to it by the Constitution. Remember, these are the questions he's going to answer. How much power is going? Is it necessary or unnecessary? What are the dangers? What are the safeguards? So he's answering some of that here. I will address one additional reflection only to those who contend that the power ought to have been restrained to external taxation, by which they mean taxes on articles imported from other countries, foreign commerce. It cannot be doubled that this will always be a valuable source of revenue, that for a considerable time it must be a principal source, that at this moment it is an essential one. So when we get into 45, he's going to tell us that the federal government was supposed to get their taxes from foreign commerce. So if they're getting their taxes from foreign commerce to do just those things that the federal government has an obligation to do, if there's a war, that's something a little extra. And that's why they can go to the people for a 2-year term only to fight that war, because that foreign commerce is still going to be what runs the federal government. But we may form very mistaken ideas on this subject if we do not call to mind in our calculations that the extent of revenue drawn from foreign commerce must vary with the variations, both in the extent and the kind of imports, and that these variations do not correspond with the progress of population, which must be the general measure of the public wants. As long as agriculture continues the sole field of labor, the importation of manufactures must increase as the consumers multiply. As soon as domestic manufactures are begun by the hands not called for by agriculture, the imported manufacturers will decrease as the numbers of people increase. See, they weren't idiots. They understood macroeconomics too. In a more remote stage, the imports may consist in a considerable part of raw materials which will be wrought into articles for exportation, and will therefore require rather the encouragement of bounties, grants, than to be loaded with discouraging duties. A system of government meant for duration ought to contemplate these revolutions and be able to accommodate itself to them. Now, this is an important slide here. I want you to kind of put this away somewhere so that when we get to the bounty payments for cod fisheries debate of 1792, you remember this. This is going to be important. Some who have not denied the necessity of the power of taxation have grounded a very fierce attack against the Constitution on the language in which it is defined. It has been urged and echoed that the power, quote, to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, end quote. Where is that in the Constitution? Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, right at the end of it, amounts to an unlimited commission to exercise every power which may be alleged to be necessary for the common defense and general welfare. No stronger proof could be given of the distress under which these writers labor for objections than their stooping to such a misconstruction. Okay? So the Anti-Federalists are saying, well, this phrase you've got in here, that they can raise, to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare, he's saying, well, the Anti-Federalists are saying, well, with that, you've given the federal government more power than kings if they can decide what's in the general welfare and common defense. That becomes an important argument in 1792. Had no other enumerations or definitions of the powers of Congress been found in the Constitution, then the general expressions just cited, the authors of the objection might have had some color for it, though it would have been difficult to find a reason for so awkward a form of describing an authority to legislate in all possible cases. A power to destroy the freedom of the press, the trial by jury, or even to regulate the course of dissents or the forms of controversies must be very singularly expressed by the terms, quote, to raise money for the general welfare. So later on in 1792, Hamilton, who actually agrees with Madison on this, writes a paper when he is the Secretary of the Treasury, a 98-page document called the document on manufacturing, okay, in which he describes that we need to get away from the laissez-faire free market, in which the government should tax and issue grants, called bounties then, to decide winners and losers in industry to create the manufacturing that they thought that we should have. Madison was against that and said, no, there needs to be free markets. That's in 1792. But right here at this time, Hamilton actually agrees with Madison that those two phrases for the general welfare and common defense do not grant any power to Congress. They are general terms that define the enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 18. When we get into the bounty payments for cod fisheries debates in 1792, Madison's going to bring this up and rub Hamilton's nose in it quite handily and remind him that this is not a novel term. These same terms were found in the Articles of Confederation. And yet, no one argued then, even the Anti-Federalists, that it gave the Confederacy any more power than it had by the enumerated limited powers. This becomes a very interesting fight in 1792. So I want you to remember that part. It's in 41. But what color can the objection have when a specification of the objects alluded to by these general terms immediately follows and is not even separated by a longer pause than a semicolon? If the different parts of the same instrument ought to be so expounded as to give meaning to every part which will bear it, shall one part of the same sentence be excluded altogether from a share in the meaning? And shall the more doubtful and indefinite terms be retained in their full extent, and the clear and precise expressions be denied any signification whatsoever? For what purpose could the enumerations of particular powers be inserted if these and all others were meant to be included in the preceding general power? You see what I'm saying? If I give Congress all the power in the end of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, then Clauses 2 through 18 don't even need to be there. And if Clauses 2 through 18 don't even need to be there, then neither does Article 2 or Article 3. And we could have stopped right there. But those terms that the Anti-Federalists are trying to scare everybody with are general terms that explain the specified powers enumerated in Articles 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 18. So he explains that here, and yet he has to do it again on the floor of Congress in 1792. Nothing is more natural or common than first to use a general phrase and then to explain and qualify it by a recital of particulars. But the idea of the enumeration of particulars which neither explain nor qualify the general meaning and can have no other effect than to confound and mislead is an absurdity, which, as we are reduced to the dilemma of charging either on the authors of the objection or on the authors of the Constitution, we must take the liberty of supporting, had not its origin, with the latter. He gets very definite in the bounty payments for cod fisheries debates in 1792. You'll love that argument. The objection here is the more extraordinary as it appears that the language used by the convention is a copy from the Articles of Confederation. The objects of the Union among the states, as described in Article 3rd, are their common defense, security of their liberties, and the mutual and general welfare. The terms of Article 8 are still more identical. All charges of war and all other expenses that shall be incurred for the common defense or general welfare and allowed by the United States and Congress shall be defrayed out of a common treasury, etc. A similar language again occurs in the Article 9th. Now he's talking about the Articles of Confederation. Construe either of these articles by the rules which would justify the construction put on the new Constitution, and they vest in the existing Congress a power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. But what would have been thought of that assembly if, attaching themselves to these general expressions and disregarding the specifications which ascertain and limit their import, they had exercised an unlimited power of providing for the common defense and general welfare? So do you get what he's saying here? The Anti-Federalists are saying, yeah, but you got that phrase in there. It gives Congress all this power for whatever they believe is in the common defense and the general welfare. And he said those are terms that explain the specified powers. It doesn't give any power to Congress. And you guys are arguing this, saying that we should have the Articles of Confederation, and I'll give you 3 articles within the Articles of Confederation in which they have the same clauses, and you never argued that that gave the government any more power then, but you're arguing it now and trying to tell the people that they shouldn't go for this new Constitution. I think you guys are CNN. Right? He fact-checked them false pretty handily. I appeal to the objectors themselves, whether they would in that case have employed the same reasoning and justification of Congress as they now make use of against the convention. How difficult it is for error to escape its own condemnation. Basically, he got done with going, you hypocrites. You lying rugs, you lie like a rug. And that's exactly what they were doing. But I want you to see the difference between then and now. Now, if somebody says, well, that's misinformation, that's a lie, what do they say? Well, we need to ban that. No. First Amendment, the right to free speech. See, Hamilton didn't have any problems going, well, you guys lied, and let me count the ways. Let me use my free speech to put the truth out there, and we'll let the people decide. That's pretty refreshing compared to today. And yet, they called themselves a republic then, and we call ourselves a democracy now. See the difference? You see why democracies are horrible forms of government? Do you see that one of the first things you do is take free speech away so that you can control the people? Do you see how we're going towards an oligarchy of socialism? If we become a democracy, a full-fledged democracy, democracies always, remember he said they're as tumultuous in their lives as they are violent in their deaths. What's the violent portion of their death? Well, at the end of this series, you're going to find out what it is. And it's in the Communist Manifesto. The democracies always bring about socialist revolution. Think about that. Have you seen Antifa? Have you seen BLM? What is that? That's the beginnings of a socialist revolution. The 16th and 17th Amendment shoved us halfway into a democracy, and we're supposed to be a republic. There's only one thing keeping us a republic right now, any semblance of a republic.